Sim, I was in my library reading, and I decided, book 'em, Dano.
Am I under arrest?
Nah, I'll let you off with a warning this time. Welcome everybody to the latest episode of the Two Fish at the Table Poker Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Legend Ben One on Poker Stars.
I'm my other host, East Coast Sam on Poker Stars. Welcome back to our book club. We're going to be reviewing four different books today. As Ben mentioned, we're going to be reviewing Harrington on Hold'em, which is probably one of the most classic poker books of all time, as well as a book from Eric Lindgren. And we have In the Money by Antonio Esfandiari, which is part of the World Poker Tour's Champion of Poker series, if you want to call it. And then All In, the memoir by Jerry Yang, the 2007 main event champion. And these are pretty interesting books to talk about, I'd say.
Yeah, this is kind of our sequel to our original Poker Book Club. We have a continuation, actually, of the WPT branded poker books. And it was kind of funny. This collection of books, besides the Jerry Yang one, they kind of form in my mind kind of an informal poker literary cinematic universe of sorts because they often reference each other, which is kind of funny. And some of them even have the books listed inside the inner spine of each other. So there was some continuity there. This first book we're discussing was a book that Sam was kind enough to gift me for a holiday present, All In by Jerry Yang, that I read in one sitting while on Nauset Beach at Cape Cod this summer. And Sam, again, thank you for the gift, and I'm very happy you picked this book because I generally feel like this was kind of the low key, the highlight of this of these four books today.
Yeah, same here. So it's different than the other books in that this is a memoir, not a poker strategy book. So it's inherently different. It's also a very special book because this one is a signed copy from Jerry Yang. It's to Fred, but it's the thought that counts. But I had no idea that this was a signed copy. I got this on Amazon, and then I opened the front of the book. I'm like, oh my God, it's a signed copy. But yeah, it's a book written by Jerry Yang. It came out in, I think, 2011. This is a few years after his main event run. And it's an interesting memoir in that it goes back and forth between his childhood growing up in Laos as a member of the Hmong community and becoming a refugee, as well as his life in poker starting in 2005 when he got into the game, and obviously, as you might imagine, focusing on his main event run. And yeah, this was a really, really interesting book. I mean, I knew about Jerry's backstory. He mentioned in the 2007 episodes that he was a refugee from Laos. But I mean, a really incredible story of his childhood, growing up in this community, having to leave home when he was just 7 years old, and his father was the elder of the community and somebody who was an authority figure, and not just to him, but to his entire community. And they had to escape through the jungle and were almost killed multiple times, not just by the military, but also by the elements. And people starved to death, and I mean, just really incredible stuff.
Yeah, it really reminded me of probably one of my favorite episodes of a childhood cartoon, the Hey Arnold Christmas special, where Mr. Huyn's background fleeing his country for America. It kind of brought those similar vibes. Obviously, certain people have these amazing stories that just us average Americans wouldn't be privy to because we have lived a very privileged, calm life. And so I felt like I'm generally a better person for having read this story. And I liked how he did manage to find some thematic ties to the poker life, including one particular anecdote in the book where he discusses that a time when he went all in, where this was a story where he was getting in trouble as a kid because he was kind of known as a troublemaker growing up in the village, and he managed to sort of go against what was sort of in the culture of respecting your elders and not questioning their authority. And in doing so, he sort of it's a little cheesy maybe, but a little on the nose, but it was a great little connection to being a poker player and going all in on a bluff.
Yeah, I mean, probably my favorite moment from this, or favorite is maybe a bit of a strong term, is he's describing being held at gunpoint and his father's reasoning with the military, and the gun is right up to his head. It's so close. He can smell the oil from the gun barrel. I mean, it's just such a visceral and powerful image. And to be a 7-year-old boy and to have that happen, I mean, it's understandable why that would stand in his head. And as harrowing as all those details are, he describes coming to America and having his first meals, eating Jello for the first time, eating cookies. As harrowing as those earlier moments are, it's so relieving and nice and sweet to hear those later moments, as well as him coming to terms with poverty in America. That, he growing up in a refugee camp, he thinks, oh, America is this opulent place where you can eat as much as you want. And he grows up and he sees poverty in America and he realizes, wait, like this isn't all that it's cracked up to be. I thought that was a really mature and beautiful thing to share. And then he became a social worker and a psychiatrist. And poker, obviously comes later in life. And, if there is sort of one thing that I think is a little lacking in this book, it's really the '07 main event run commentary in and of itself. And we get a little bit of insight into those early days. He talks a lot about the hotel room he stayed at, which was just a total crap house, really bad place to live. Um, but there wasn't so much insight in terms of, how is he thinking and feeling? How is he responding to hands at the final table? And, the real rich commentary and insight is in those early years, which is totally understandable. And I really enjoyed those sections a lot, but I would have liked a little bit more thought and substance in that main event material.
I thought it was okay because I obviously drew a lot of comparisons from this take on this main event run to Dr. James Magner's run in his book, Sticking Hidden Treasures, where unlike that book where we had a pretty unnecessary mystery and half-hearted romance baked into the plot, at least here, he would maybe there'd be two chapters of his background and then one chapter of the main event. And while they didn't quite, it didn't feel, we were going in chronological order, but it didn't always feel like, these two chapters of his past tied into this part of the main event. So besides maybe that not being quite continuous with itself throughout the entire thing, I was okay with maybe the critique you had just now, but either way, again, I thought it was a better effort than Miner's fictionalized approach. I forget the word you used to describe that kind of story where it's like a fictionalized take on something, but I thought it was okay the way it was done.
Yeah, that's a Romana Clef is
Ramona
a
Clef, that's right.
novel that is mostly based on real events, and he changed the names around. Yeah, I mean, this is obviously nonfiction, and again, there's some moments that are interesting, like namely the Lee Child's hands, the Queens versus Jacks, where he sort of talks about also running into Lee Child's later on afterward and being like, "Wow, if Lee Childs had made that call." Jerry Yang is out of the tournament, and who knows, maybe Lee Childs becomes main event champion, and their lives are entirely different. But I mean, that was kind of an interesting moment, as well as him just sort of coming to terms with his fame, about to go heads up against Tuan Lam, and random people are coming up to him being like, Jerry, I want to be your agent. Jerry, can I shake your hand? You're going to win the main event. It's like, well, I haven't won the main event yet. Let me go and do it. And obviously, I mean, Jerry Yang is an interesting figure in the poker world in that, he's nearly universally considered to be the worst main event champion of all time. Maybe Jamie Gold, creeps into that title, but I think Ben and I have spoken about this, maybe not on this podcast, but previously. He probably had the best strategy of any main event winner. He was eighth in chips. He said to himself, I'm going to be the aggressor. I'm going to push the action. He obviously pushed against Philip Hilm. We talked to Philip Hilm about his strategy. But I mean, he really played a great final table, and he's a seems like a sweetheart of a guy. I think he may have had some tax problems at some point, but like beside that, I haven't heard of any scandals from him or anything like that. So and he donated a lot of his money to charity. He did donate over $800,000 to charity, and he continues to do charity events. And I saw an interview with him from a couple of years ago where he was being interviewed by another person of the Hmong community, and he like has set up a restaurant in California, and he's seems to be very happy and seems to have a good life. So, it's nice to see the human side of somebody like that who in the poker community isn't exactly well loved.
Yeah, we obviously had our amazing interview with Philip Hilm, who finished in ninth place to Jerry Yang, and a lot of their confrontation is almost as big a focus as the Lee Child's hands are in that section of this book here. And to your point, Jerry Yang, he might be worse than Jamie Gold. I feel like Jamie Gold had a fair amount of sort of small to medium tournament results prior to his '06 run, and he also I forget what year it was, but I want to say it was like mid 2010. So he got second place to Esfandiari in a World Series Poker Circuit event. So, he's been, he's made a few runs here and there, and he did cash in the main event a couple of years ago. So I think maybe I give the nod to Jamie Gold by a little bit. But again, this is we're talking about, only results that we can physically see on TV, on online. I mean, Jerry Yang, he discusses his early poker play in leading up to '07, how he was playing in satellites and sit and goes and doing fairly well for himself, making a profit. So, he has poker chops. I guess we kind of base our stats of, how good a player is based upon how they do up against the top pros, but really that's not what poker is. Poker is versus a lot of amateurs, a lot of recreationals, a lot of middle range players that we just don't see. So these guys would probably both wipe the floor with us regardless. So to each their own, I guess. But and again, there could be one or two bad main event champions that we just haven't been watching ESPN growing up. So who knows, really?
Yeah, I mean by that I mean the moneymaker era. I mean the last 20 winners.
Yeah.
I went on Reddit sort of doing research about Jerry Yang, and it really seems like he's the one that people on the subreddit R Poker seem to think is the worst main event champion of all time. Because it seems like people seem to give credit to Jamie Gold for his speech play, which is understandable. As you mentioned, he got second place in I think it was a circuit event against Esfandiari, I think in 2016 or so.
Yeah.
And then he cashed in obviously a couple main events. And yeah, Jerry, I think has got, I have to look at his Hendon mom. I think like a couple $100,000 in tournament earnings over the last 20 years. So, he's totally fine. Obviously, he's set up as a restaurateur. That takes a lot of work. So it's understandable why he's not super involved in the game anymore. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think he comes off very well in this. And if you're curious about Jerry Yang's life and where he comes from, you can definitely read this book. It's definitely something I recommend, even to somebody who's not super interested in poker. There's a little strategy section in the back where he goes over, some tips and stuff. But it's really his story and his life journey and what brought him to the game. And again, not so much attention paid to, poker strategy of, oh, this is why I did this hand in the main event. This is how I moved my chip stack upward. But still something that provides some personal insight.
Yeah, I mean, there were a few tiny math typo errors, like maybe he said like four big blinds was 2,400 when it would have been 1,800 or something like, there's some weird little things like that. But otherwise, it's a pretty solidly written book. I'm happy I read it. I read it in one very relaxing afternoon on the Cape, so that was nice. But we have a different segue into how we obtain these next couple of books. There is a lovely little used bookstore in Wayland, Massachusetts called Barely Read Books that unfortunately is closing or has closed due to the owners retiring. So we knew from having bought a couple books from there last time we had been there that they had a small section on a very top shelf in the store that were poker books, and so we grabbed a few books. These being a couple of them, you have the Esfandiari one over there as well. And the first one of the three that we read was called Making the Final Table by Eric Lindgren and Matt Matros. And this book is actually kind of almost like chapter two of the WPT literature after Shuffle Up and Deal, which is again in sort of this line of WPT branded books. And Eric in the intro kind of talks about how this book is kind of meant to be for the intermediate players and onward, particularly with a strategy of getting you from the beginning of a tournament to the final table. And that I can appreciate because I do find that I play pretty solid, pretty mistake-free poker in the early goings of tournaments, and then I often find myself maybe usually being shorter stacked towards the money bubble, towards the final table, and going out relatively early. I know that I've had several final tables in the MSO where I got eighth, got ninth because I was, usually towards the bottom here, and so I felt like this was kind of like speaking towards me in that sort of level.
Yeah, I mean, there's really, you could summarize the entire book in four words: go for the win. You just put your pedal to the metal and you just take advantage of as many spots as possible and be aggressive. The term that I often hear from tournament poker players when they're giving advice about tournament poker is to avoid marginal situations. If you have ace nine off suit, you should fold it, things like that. But Eric Lindgren really seems to emphasize, no, you put your pedal to the metal, you put other players to tough decisions, and you go for the win. Again, stuff that I think is pretty commonplace nowadays, but remember that this was back in the early to mid 2000s when tight was considered to be right, when conservative players were considered to be sort of the top of the game, and Eric Lindgren and Esfandiari and Phil Locke were considered the young guns challenging these older players, and they can play with any two cards, they can do anything. Eric doesn't say that in the book. He mentions that, in early position, he'll usually play aces, kings, ace, king suited, things like that. In late position, he'll play suited connectors, ace 10, king queen, things like that. So he's not playing any two cards, but definitely his emphasis is on don't focus on cashing. When you get to the bubble, you should have chips, push players around. If you're in a super satellite and you have pocket aces and you're the big stack, the overwhelming big stack, and there's players with two big blinds, you should fold pocket aces instead of trying to get them out so that you can guarantee yourself a spot into the next tournament, which is actually in the book. I'm not kidding, word for word, that's what he encourages players to do, which I thought was very surprising. I figured, all right, you should just try to knock them out and then get to your satellite. But it's a very interesting book to read for somebody like me who's a tight player who really is more focused on laddering and trying to make the money. I mean, my strategy is, I'd rather cash more times more often than try to go for the win and risk losing and busting out early, which helps the Mind Sport Olympiad because I think they're a bit tighter there. So it's nice to have a tight game myself and kind of try to ladder up. Also, because my bluffs never work and I'm uncomfortable with,
That's not true.
making post-flop decisions and all that. But
I could have sworn the last like 2 years you're always saying how you've bluffed like 3 times and they always worked. I disagree entirely with you.
yeah, like three times.
Yeah, but
I bluffed
you're
seven
saying you.
times the last MSO,
All
seven
right.
times out of like God knows how many spots. But I'm uncomfortable bluffing. I like to just kind of sit back, let other players make the mistakes, play premium hands. So it's nice to hear from Eric Lindgren, somebody who is the opposite of me, about what I should be doing.
Yeah, and really, this book, the major chunk of this book is dividing into chapters for each section of the tournament. So, like day one, middle of the tournament, approaching the bubble, immediately post bubble, final table build up, and then the actual final table. And that's nice because, again, it's just good to have a organic structure of how to where to alter your strategy here and there when you're in a big tournament. And again, he also talks about early on the difference between cash game poker and tournament poker. And again, I've only played one tournament for real money in my entire life. That was in Las Vegas, and I did a few taste samplings of the cash game scene. And so that's my live poker experience. And obviously, I've had 20 plus years of party poker, Poker Stars, free money tournament experience. So. I can definitely speak to the validity of that section there, even though I personally do prefer tournaments more than cash games. I like the idea of winning a tournament rather than just, oh, I won, $5 playing for an hour at a cash game. That's just not really exciting to me, all of that prospect. And I know, Sam, you are trying to become the best poker player in the world to have never played for real money. And so I think you're probably getting pretty close to that moniker. I feel like, I mean, how many people really fit into that narrow title?
Well, I think I'll get a couple more Mind Sport Olympiad medals, and then I think I'll, maybe clear that out. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting book to read again from. So as you mentioned, it does a really great job breaking down day by day. Okay, here's what you should do on day one. Here's day two, the build up to the final table, and then heads up. Again, just breaking everything down clearly. And as I mentioned, the recurring theme is go for the win. But also, Eric really seems to be capable of switching gears. He mentions there actually is some scenarios when you're at the final table where you maybe don't want to go for the win, where maybe you do want to fold some, better than optimal spots so that you can ladder upward and get yourself into a better position when you're heads up. And as I mentioned earlier, if you're in a satellite event or a super satellite, and let's say there's 5 players left, and you're the chip leader with 4 spots going into the tournament and winning seats into the tournament, he encourages you to fold aces if you're a big chip, which it just kind of blows my mind to think folding aces pre-flop when have a huge stack and players have 2 big blinds. But any case, there also is a section on online tournaments, and he talks a little bit about, recalibrating your play in terms of online. And it was also interesting reading a section on, which is toward the end of the book, about what you do with $1 million. Because $1 million obviously is a lot of money and can change your life, but you can't retire off of it. And he even tells people, if you have a day job and you win $1 million, keep your day job. Bankroll management is so important that as long as you have a day job, you can keep funding your bankroll versus $1 million can, go away pretty quickly if you're sports betting or if you go up in stakes and you can't play those stakes. So it's kind of interesting to hear him, bring it back to earth and be like, hey, you really need to be smart with this money.
Yeah, yeah. Jim Reed, who we interviewed a while back, talked about the importance of bankroll management. And again, it's kind of funny that it's Eric Lindgren of all people talking about this because he even mentions, that he has struggled with this in his life. And, years after this books publication. He had some notable heavy sports betting and poker debts that I'd like to think maybe by now he's kind of gotten out from underneath, but who knows at this point, his finances or his business. One thing I did kind of appreciate in this book was sort of like almost little cheeky comments that Lindgren kind of slips in sometimes using parentheses at the end of a sentence. So it just adds a little bit of maybe humor or a little personality to the writing because I mean, poker books I'm always trying to find that one thing that makes any one book stand out from the other, and that was maybe the detail for this book that did that.
Yeah, a couple places. Like at one point, he talks about, or he's talking about his co-writer Matt Metros, who kind of bobs and weaves throughout the book. It seems like this was written in Eric Lindgren's voice, and maybe Matt kind of chipped in a little bit, helped with the editing and all that. But anyway, he's telling a story about Matt, about how he was on the bubble and had King Jack suited, I believe. And there was this other player who seemed really agitated and like pushed his chips, made a raise or something, and then Matt put them all in, and the guy tanked for a few minutes. And in the writing, he called him agitated player with a capital A and a capital P. Yeah, like little details like that go a long way and add a lot of life to the book.
And then the last or the second to last section of this book is kind of this weird WPT leaderboards thing where it talks about like the top earners of the WPT and who's won what events and stuff. And I kind of found that to be kind of an odd inclusion because I feel like this came out maybe like 05, 06. So maybe, looking up stats online was not quite as prevalent for poker. But I don't know, it just kind of felt like wasted paper and maybe just meant to be a page filler for the book.
Yeah, probably like my least favorite part of all these books is how it's trying to be WPT promotional material. Like there's always a section toward the start of this book, like the WPT is the world's fastest growing tournament, and we reach millions of households worldwide, and everybody watches us. Uh, it gets really annoying, and I understand you have to add a little bit of that, but I mean, just look at the cover, right? Like you have World Poker Tour right here. On the back, you have only on Travel Channel. That's enough promotional stuff, right? You don't need to be like, we're the future of sports and we're the NFL of poker and things like that. And that section in particular, I'm glad you brought that up, was really weird because I remember reading it for the first time thinking like, oh, this is going to be like the top 10 people who are at the WPT or the top 20. It keeps going. It goes through like pretty much everybody who had made the final table at some point. It even has the ladies' night people who didn't make any money. Like at the very end of the list, it's like I think it was Cloney Gowan or something, $0, third place ladies' night. It just kept going and going, and it was really weird because they also had a section right before that was like the Millionaires Club, which was everybody who had won $1 million up till then. Okay, that's fine. There were already like 20 people on that list by 2005. It's kind of cool to see. You don't need to then have this comprehensive list that's like 12 pages long with like, John Smith got fourth place at the WPT championship event in Atlantic City and he got $400,000. It was very weird.
Yeah, and the actual meat of this book is only 120 pages. And this is kind of an issue I had with the Esfandiari book that we'll discuss next also, is that it just kind of felt like they were straining to get this book to be long enough. Like one of the designs of this book is after each chapter, you might have like a blank page. And then the next page, which is the first page of the next chapter, will have like a picture from the WPT TV show, but it eats up like half the page. And so really, it's kind of felt like an English student in high school trying to make like a 10-page paper and you're trying to like play at the margins and add double space and try to make as little content as possible to fill 10 pages. It kind of felt like that with this book because they didn't quite have enough content to make a full, like solid book.
Yeah, I mean, this book is obviously for a general audience. It's for the WPT fans. I mean, you mentioned that intermediate players could, in theory, read the book, and Eric Lindgren says, this is for the intermediate player. But I think, somebody who had a decent amount of experience in the mid 2000s would probably know most of the stuff that Eric is talking about, unless they're a very, very conservative player and just unfamiliar with being tight, or being aggressive, rather. So, I mean, it's just kind of strange to see, as you mentioned, all these sort of padded sections. And we get into the Esfandiari book. There's a lot of just sort of like weird anecdotes and subsections thrown into that book. Not so much in the Eric Lindgren book, but really much in the Esfandiari book. And I understand like you need to add a couple of those sections and adding a photo here and there is okay. But it kind of detracts from the informative quality of the book. And it really breaks it down into sections and makes it choppier when it doesn't need to be.
Yeah, and again, I still enjoyed reading it. I mean, Lindgren was a major player in those mid to late 2000s, and to the early 2010s, less work than he was in. He made like 43rd in the 2011 main event and had that bubbling on the TV table in 2012. So he was there, a pretty prominent figure. He was the spotlighted pro on the feature table, I think in '08 and '09, maybe 2010, for those main events. So again, we knew him a fair amount from TV, and so I was happy to read a bit of his work here. But I would say I'm definitely looking back a much bigger fan of Mr. Antonio Esfandiari, the magician. So I was very excited to read this next book called In the Money: Strategies for Winning Texas Hold'em Cash Games, written with help from David Apostolico, right? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, I
Probably
think so.
Apostolico. Oh,
Yeah,
but I almost
Pasta.
forgot. In the Lindgren book, after the WPT section, there was a brief section by Matt Matros about poker math, and the math kind of went over my head. Like it felt like it was very dense, very thick math that I didn't feel like really would improve my game. And I'm a math guy. Like I was, a guy a year ahead in math in high school, and I didn't care for that section either.
Yeah, it was too technical for me. I'm an English major, so maybe that's a reason why. But yeah, like it was kind of a strange section to throw in. If you want to do something like that, okay, that's fine. And again, that's supposed to be, the intermediate player book. Maybe that'll help make it a little bit more advanced. But yeah, it was just sort of a weird throw in into the back of the book. Nothing that ruined the book for me or anything, but just, yeah, again, as you mentioned earlier, sort of just padding for additional content.
Yeah. So again, Nato Esfandiari. So his book, I think it seems like it was written chronologically after Lindgren's book. It kind of almost kind of felt like again like volume three of the WPT, book series here. It's a fairly similar length to the Lindgren book, maybe a couple pages longer, but I also felt that it had less sort of high quality meat to the meat of the book compared to Lindgren, if you ask me.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, Esfandiari has a lot of personality. Obviously, and everybody who's seen this podcast has probably seen at least one clip of Esfandiari and how talkative it is, how naturally engaging he is. And, my favorite parts of the book were when he just talked about his background, talked about how, he was walked into a restaurant one day and the bartender asked him to pick a card. And he goes, the seven of clubs. And the bartender pulls out this deck of cards that it was not opened. It was all closed and everything. And the seven of clubs was the only card that had a red back, and all the other cards had a blue back. And that's what made him want to be a magician. And he also talks about getting into poker tournaments and how, he just walked home one day and his roommate was watching a poker tournament. He got interested in the game. Stuff like that really adds some life. And Esfandiari, is a talkative player, one of the real masters of table talk. Unfortunately hasn't played as prominent a role in poker as he did in the golden years, really. Um, but yes, I mean, those sort of personal anecdotes and insights are what I found really interesting in this book. And the poker stuff, again, I mean, Ben and I have read a couple of poker strategy books beside, Lindgren, of course, before this. And yeah, I mean, they all sort of tread the same ground. When you hear, oh, this is going to be a cash game book, you're thinking, okay, it's going to distinguish itself more from the tournament poker strategy books, but it really doesn't. I mean, it offers pretty similar advice. There is one chapter kind of distinguishing between tournament poker and cash game poker. And again, Esfandiari brings up things like trying to avoid marginal spots when you're in tournament poker, trying to ladder up, things like that. Um, and if you're not familiar with basic strategy in poker, okay, I can see how this book is helpful. Again, this is for a general audience back in the mid 2000s, before YouTube was a thing, before solvers were a thing, when poker media was less accessible. So I can understand that it might want to retrod some of that familiar ground. But for somebody like us who's read these other poker books, and especially when you take into account this is a series with Mike Sexton and Eric Lindgren's books also there, I would have liked something that was a bit more distinct in terms of the strategy.
Yeah, the book begins with a foreword by Phil Locke, where he mentions actually a game I'd never heard before, Spread Limit Hold'em. So that was kind of amusing to hear about. And Phil Locke and Esfandiari have been friends for a very long time. They had that TV show I Bet You that we reviewed a while back that was kind of fun to watch. And again, he also talks about the difference between limit hold'em and no limit hold'em, especially in cash games, since it's a very different thing. The math is very different. Bluffing is a very different beast, and how you play a hand can be very different. I mean, I personally love limit hold'em. I've always made a killing at it in MSO, and so I can appreciate. I feel like maybe just because it's a simpler game, and that's why I'm better at it. But then I don't know. I feel like I always have better success in that game than my opponents do. And then he talks about how he got into Magic and how Magic led him to poker, and how he's he did some parties at some poker players, and that kind of got him into the world there. And again, the magician, Mr. Esfandiari, I feel like more than just his table talk, his reading ability was also very strong as a in the tournament scene. And so I wanted to really learn about his poker reading skills, whether it's live tells or just reading a hand from a bet patterns. And I didn't really get any of that in this book. I mean, it felt like I wrote in my notes here, like about 70 pages into this book, so almost about halfway, there really wasn't anything substantially written. There was a lot of fluff in the first half, a lot of background, a lot of, well, poker is this, poker is that, before we got into, scenarios and strategies. And then in the middle part of the book, we finally get poker scenarios and how to play in those situations, which is fine. But again, it just felt like it took too long. And this is already, again, a book where you have all those sort of page filler tricks where you have a lot of blank pages in between chapters, and half the page is a picture of a player in the middle of a hand from the WPT. And so, it felt a bit more like with the Lindgren book, how there was a lot of fillerizing in this book to get to the length that it was.
Yeah, I mean, you may have noticed I keep sort of flipping through the book here because I really don't remember a whole lot of the, real intricate strategy. As you mentioned, like here's just one example of a page which is just, mostly blank. I mean, here's an example of, photos, right? Like that just fill half the page here. And it's like, okay, cool. The bad boys of poker, there's Paul Darden and Phil Locke and all that. But like, you don't really need these photos. It doesn't illustrate anything about the poker strategy that Antonio is talking about. And yeah, like I actually had to review this book last night because again, I just didn't really remember a whole lot of the intricate strategy. He does break down post flop play and pre flop play. So that's kind of nice to establish, like, okay, this is what he should do in each situation. But then his chapters on turn and river play are only a few pages long. I mean, looking right here, his chapter on turn play is 6 pages long. And I mean, that's a pretty critical street. He even says at the start of the chapter, the turn is where we separate the men from the boys, the women from the girls, and the players from the pretenders. And yet it's six pages long, and that's all you've got. If it's so integral, you should go into a little bit more detail. When do you fire a second bullet? When do you shut down? When should a semi-bluff come into play? Things like that. And he talks also a little bit about table image, but again, it's a very abbreviated chapter, so you don't really get much of a sense of, how do you develop a table image? If you have a tight image, when do you use that to your advantage? If you have a crazy image, when do you use that to your advantage? As you mentioned, like he really doesn't talk too much about using table talk. He mentions a couple small things, like he talks about if he's in a hand with another player, he'll ask him, "What do you have?" And the other player will start to count their chips, and then Antonio will say, "No, no, what are your cards?" And the guy will kind of laugh and give some sort of response. Um, okay, that's a nice little trick. I mean, might be something I want to use, but like I'd like to hear a little bit more. What are the risks of table talk? When you're talking so much at the table and trying to get things, how do you get things out of other players without giving away things in your hand? I'd like to hear a little bit of that, but we just don't get that in this book.
But then towards the end, unlike the end of the Lingard book, which I had issues with, there's a couple of things in the back that I think weren't terrible. I liked how we had a little bit about different Metatrick stories. We had a section on poker abbreviations, which again, there's usually one or two in these books that I just haven't heard before because they're not too common in my lexicon when I'm at the table. There's also a brief bit on how to shuffle chips, which is amusing because there was actually a bonus DVD with this book, much like the Mike Sexton book, which had the sort of poker primer with Lou Diamond Phillips. We have is it maybe like an 8 or 10 minute thing about that? We'll get to that in a minute. And then there was also the Ask Antonio section, which was kind of a Q&A section, which I actually really like. It's kind of like, it reminds me of a lot of magazines. They have sort of sections like letters from the readers. I always enjoy those. I love those as a kid for Nintendo Power magazine, for example. And so it was kind of fun, even though the questions were kind of cliche and not anything too crazy. I could have definitely enjoyed seeing like a weekly blog of Esfandiari answering questions like that for sure.
Yeah, and it's again nice to show that he has a little bit of his personality in his answers. I mean, just looking right here, he gets a question: "Being as famous as you are, women must throw themselves at you. How do you handle it?" And he replied, "You know what they say? It's a dirty job, but someone's got to do it." Which is, he's married with kids now, so it's kind of funny to read that. Yeah, I mean, it's a nice little section. It adds a little bit of life to it, and a little bit of his personality comes through. There's also a thank you section at the end where he thanks his loved ones and stuff, and I thought that was very sweet too.
Yeah, it made me kind of think, had this been a book just about kind of like more in the Jerry Yang's book of vibe, where it was less about how to play poker and just more about a Esfandiari book, I think it could have been pretty successful. But because it kind of has to ham in this sort of half-hearted, how to play poker here, how to play poker there, I feel like it lost some of the potential there that could have been there for a stronger book. And it was kind of funny how in the suggested poker reading section towards the back, it included four books that we have discussed, which includes the two WPT books as well. So it's just kind of funny, again, part of this poker literature universe where a lot of books reference each other and tie in together. That was kind of funny.
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of similarities I noticed between this book and Dan Harrington's book, which we'll get into in a moment, and also Eric Lindgren's book too. You can almost kind of say that Dan Harrington's book is the more sort of intellectual, long form version of these books. Um, but yeah, again, this is an okay book. I mean, obviously, some of the strategy is, you have to take into account solvers, you have to take into account GTO and other things in terms of tournament strategy. Cash game, it's a bit different. The game's evolved a little, and Esfandiari has evolved a little in terms of how he plays and presents himself. But I think it still holds up okay. If you're not familiar with these other books, if you haven't read these other books, you can read this one and learn a bit. But if you have read these other books in the past, then you can probably skip this one.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of our stance on some of these poker documentaries we've watched, where if you've watched, all these other ones and before it, it's going to kind of affect your how effective this one is now for you in this moment. But if it was a one-off situation for you, then you'll probably be fine. But as
Yeah.
far as the Chip Tricks DVD, so this is actually a pretty short, maybe like 8 or 10 minutes long, not pretty brief thing with Esfandiari's a few clips of poker at the very start, and then Esfandiari goes through five different chip tricks, well, card and chip tricks. The first three are chip tricks, and the last two are kind of bonus tricks. The first one is just it's just kind of Esfandiari sitting at a table talking to the camera, a couple different angles of his hands, and you can see what he's manipulating. The first one being the chip riffle, which again I've been doing for a long time. It's for me it's pretty easy. It was kind of silly to see that it's kind of spelled out step by step when you just kind of have to watch someone do it once and you can kind of probably get it instantly. But it's kind of funny how we discussed how the number of chips was important as well as the surface of the table you're playing on, and then he tries to riffle 20 chips and actually kind of fails doing it. Like if you look at the chips that he stacks, like the 10 and 10, they don't all like go 1 1 1 1 1 1 when he's showing all 20. It's kind of funny to me when I saw that.
Yeah, it's a really strange video. He doesn't seem super comfortable as he's presenting this stuff. Like the tone in his voice sounds a little tinny, a little canned. It's sort of like weird set. World Poker Tour is very prominent in the background in case you forgot who made this video. Yeah, there's chip riffling. There's the chip pullover, which is when you have like a stack of four chips and you sort of just pull one over the other three. There's the spin and twirl, which is when you have, again, like a stack of three chips, you push this middle chip out and then you spin it around and put it back in. And then just for fun, he shows off a couple card tricks. Um, okay, I mean, you already bought the book, so I guess, throw the chip count DVD in there, or chip tricks DVD in there. I mean, it's prominently spelled out on the cover, chip tricks inside. And the book costs $16. So, okay, sure, throw in a DVD in there, why not? It's not necessary. I mean, I don't really understand why they made this. The graphics look like something out of the 1980s. It looks like, something out of an instruction, like a health video that they used to show me in elementary school. They'd wheel the TV out and then they'd show like healthy eating. This is how you can add 5 daily vegetables. It's like one of those type videos. Kind of endearing in its own way. That like now that I say that out loud, it's kind of like okay, like it's sort of so bad it's good, sort of endearing. But yeah, it is what it is.
Well, I actually thought that the deck trick where you fan the deck out and you take one card and kind of go, I thought that was kind of cool actually. That was my
That
favorite
was
of the
good.
five tricks by far. And again, with each trick, it's finally already does it, and then it'll cut back to sort of step-by-step instructions on how to do it. And it was again with the chip tricks, I wasn't particularly impressed by it. I mean, I we could have probably practiced them and seen if we would have pulled it off from the instructions that he provided there. And then the last trick was cutting the deck of one hand, which I don't know. I kind of felt like it's called the Chip Tricks DVD, but there's only three tricks that are chips, and then there's two that are not. And then also at the very top of the video, there was sort of inspiring Yari's general poker tricks: the stare down, the trash talk, the aggressive play. And so actually, this DVD, I feel like it would have been better served to be called just poker tricks or like table tricks because it's actually less than half of the video is about chip tricks actually. If you I think if you factor in the whole runtime.
Yeah, and again, these tricks are just very rudimentary. I mean, again, as somebody who's a magician, I expect something that's a bit, classier and a bit more intricate. So to just be like, all right, here's this really basic thing that you can see, anybody who plays poker do and anybody can figure out very quickly is just very odd.
But then, ironically, there's a brief end montage at the end of the DVD of like other like card dexterity tricks that are actually, if you ask me, far more impressive and I want to learn about than the ones on the DVD. So it was kind of like a tease for like, if you get good, you can do the really good stuff. But then like, well, how am I going to show me that stuff, please? I mean, come on. I mean, this is only about 8, 10 minutes long. I mean, the Poker Primer DVD was a full WPT episode in length, like 40-ish minutes. And we hated that, but at least this one, when it wasn't nearly as long. But I was like, if you could teach me every single card trick, something, give me all those. Then I don't mind taking a whole 40 minutes to learn all those things. Just give me a little bit of that.
Yeah, it's just a weird thing that they made. I mean, I don't really understand why they would include it. I just hope Esfandiari got paid.
I'm sure he did. And I wonder if maybe, because they had the DVD in the first book we read, Shuffle Up a Deal. Eric Lindgren did not have a DVD in it. And I wonder if maybe the sales were worse. Maybe they felt like they had to put a little bonus in there or something. I don't know. Or maybe his funding already volunteered to do this for the book. I mean, you said it was a $16 retail when it would have come out. We got it probably for less than $10 on sale at Billy Red Books. So you probably could find a copy of this somewhere on Amazon or some Facebook marketplace or something, or even message us for if you want to try this book out for a lot less. But again, it's a fun little novelty. I always think having bonus things with a book is kind of fun, whether it's a bookmark inside the cover or a fancy a coupon for whatever. It's kind of bonus stuff's always kind of fun. So I feel like there's no harm, no foul, but just don't get your hopes up when you watch this little DVD. Which
Yeah, I mean, again, it's that they put it on the cover. I mean, Chip Trick's DVD inside. I mean, it's like they are trying to hype this up, like, oh my God, you can learn from the magician himself about how to handle chips. So yeah, don't get your hopes up. Keep your hopes
yeah.
modest.
And so that leaves us here with the fourth book in our book club two. We have Harrington on Hold'em, Expert Strategies for No-Limit Tournaments, Volume 1, Strategic Play, the first edition that came out in 2005 by Dan Harrington and Bill Roberts. And I will say, of all the books talking about No-Limit Hold'em in particular that weren't like these sort of biographical in nature, this is probably my favorite as far as giving us detailed breakdowns of poker situations, strategies throughout the course of a hand, and I really dug the voice of Dan Harrington in this book.
Yeah, I really like this book a lot too. And what I really liked about it is in each chapter, there are sometimes even 20 hands where he explains the principles of the chapter and he breaks down what you should do, but also what actually happened in the hand and why he disagrees with it. Why is there a problem if a bet size is too big? Why is there a problem if a bet size is too small? He breaks it down very well. But also, Dan Harrington doesn't come off like a professor lecturing you. It really feels like you're sitting at a table with him, watching these players play, and he's breaking sort of colorful turn phrase and little sort of humorous things in there, while still keeping an intellectual air about him, still breaking down these hands in detail. So I really like this book a lot.
Yeah, because comparing the Esfandiari and Lindgren books, it kind of reminded me of comparing two different college uh, classes. I remember in college, Gen Bio, where like the first two or three or even four lectures were kind of like chapter one, like intro to bio, intro to this book, like the syllabus for the class, like where you're like waiting for the juicy stuff of the course to finally be taught. Whereas this book jumps right into the good stuff. It felt like, like a level one elective versus level two elective, where you're getting a bit more into the mind space that you want to be for the topic at hand. And again, it was fun that this book is called Volume One of this sort of book series because I felt like it didn't feel incomplete to me. I felt like by the end of the book, I felt like I wasn't being given half a product. I felt like we got enough, poker strategy and knowledge in this book that I didn't feel compelled to read Volume Two because I didn't get the full meal out of Volume One.
Yeah, I think volume two goes into tournament play and what you do sort of in the later stages of a tournament. This was sort of the fundamentals. As I mentioned earlier, talking about the Esfandiari book, how he has a chapter on post-flop play, turn play, and river play. Harrington also has those chapters, but unlike Esfandiari, he really goes into detail about this is what you should do on the turn, this is what you should do on the river, this is how your actions before the flop and after the flop will set up your actions on the turn and the river. Dan Harrington is very well known for having a tight style, even though he's called Action Dan, which is, an ironic title. And yeah, he sticks to that for the most part, but he does sort of talk about this is where you should open up your range a little bit. This is how you should play a hand. And some of his examples, the hypothetical player is playing like 10-7 or some foolish hand and decides to continue on. And he explains what you would do if you did decide to do that, which is, again, really nice that he's able to kind of step outside his own head and go into examples of, okay, this is what would happen if you were to loosen up your style a little bit.
One of my favorite parts of the early sections of this book was the chapter called What is a Hand, where he
Mhm.
discusses how a player was talking to him about a hand where he only described what his cards were and what his opponent's cards were in retelling the story. Whereas Harrington wanted to say, like, but what was your position? How many chips did you have? What was the action before you? How were they playing before this hand? How there's so many details that need to be known to really provide expert and complete analysis of a hand. And so to the amateur, they care, oh, I had aces, they had kings, and nothing else matters. Whereas, Darrington could say, well, what hand were they playing before, and how other details can influence what the right strategy is in that situation. So again, I like that small little detail of bringing down a hand in totality because I'm guilty of that too, where I'll only discuss, oh, Sam in the MSO, I had ace king and they had ace queen, and, I lost because I didn't fold the top pair, but they had two pair, but I should have known that they, again, it's just kind of good to hear something like that really resonated with my poker experience.
Yeah, and also you mentioned that's a small thing, but that's something that applies to pretty much the entire book. He breaks down position, he breaks down chip size. He also breaks down whether we're talking about a live tournament or an online tournament, and also if it's like a single table sit and go, or if it's a big online tournament, if it's a major live event or a smaller, more modest event. In each of those hand examples, he'll say, player A is a tight player who seems like he's been playing a pretty solid game. Player E is somebody who's just sat down at the table and you don't know what he's like. And each of those little details affects your action, right? If you know where you are in relation to these other players, if you know what your style is in relation to these other players, it's going to affect your action significantly. And, it's such a profound insight to, again, that there's so many different variables attached to a poker hand that you need to consider and you need to take some time to think about it. It's something you don't really think about ironically, this really profound insight staring you in the face to just sit down, think through all the variables, think through what you know about these players before you make a decision. The line that's come up, I think not just in the Harrington book, but I think in all of these books, is poker is a game of incomplete information, and that you need to give yourself as much information as possible to succeed. And that's where things like value betting and continuation betting comes in, leading out when you're in early position, even after the flop, so that you can get information on your opponent. Because if you check and they bet, you don't have as much information then. If you had let out and they raised or called you, then that gives you the information you need to proceed.
Yeah, and this book also goes into things like the math of poker, like poker pot odds, odds of making a hand, comparing the pot odds to if you have a flush draw, but the pot odds are against you, then you got to fold versus when to recognize that you are making the correct call to chase a draw, for example. And again, similar to Lindgren, he breaks down, pre-flop, post-flop, post-turn, river, and giving you insight in each one. And again, like you mentioned, there are each chapter has a section on poker situation slash problems where he'll give you a picture of what your cards are, the table layout, how many chips everybody has, and everything. And I actually thought that it might have been nice had that been structured slightly different, where maybe you had like multiple choice, like what do you do here, and what and but instead what he does is he sort of presents a situation and then says what he would do versus what the player did in that situation, which is fine. But I would have liked maybe a bit more of like a poker textbook where you have a problem and you try to solve it and then you see the answer afterwards. It's fine the way it's done here, but I thought maybe that my personal preference would have been a bit different.
Yeah, he does have like a question at the end, like what would you do? But then he immediately answers it right afterward. Would have been nice to again like a little bit of blank space or multiple choices you mentioned would have been nice. Again, it's fine as it is. And again, what I like is that each hand really feels different. It's not like, okay, you have aces versus kings, it's like sometimes you have 10-7. Sometimes you have ace queen in early position and you have to fold. Other times, you'll hit top pair, but you're not sure if top pair is good or not. He talks about the texture of the flop. If you hit top pair, you have, ace 10 and a 10 comes up on the flop. Okay, that's usually a good hand, but what if there's two clubs on board? What if the board is 10-9-8? What do you do then? You don't automatically assume that your opponent has the straight, but you have to proceed forward in the hand considering the texture of the flop. Again, it's very practical. It's not too highbrow. There's a little bit of math involved, implied odds are explained, but nothing that's again too, like the math section that was in the Eric Lindgren book, where it's just like here's all these equations and all these numbers out of nowhere. It's practical math. There is a table in the book that explains like, okay, if you have a straight draw, this is how many outs you have. If you have two overs in a straight draw, this is how many outs. And that can be helpful if you're not familiar with that. But again, like it's those hand examples that lay out in clear detail what you should and shouldn't be doing and how you should be making your bet sizes that I really found instructive.
And this book is by far the longest of these four books, and it's also probably the densest or thickest book. So I took the longest to read this one. I read this probably in maybe 6 or 7 sessions rather than one or two for the rest of the books that we read earlier. And so I think that most readers will probably have a similar experience where you'll want to kind of digest a section before you move on to the next one because there's a lot to learn and a lot to soak in. One section I also appreciated was the two rules of poker tells section where he talks about how if a player, usually if they're acting a certain way, their actual hand is the opposite because they're trying to fool you. And while you could always have the reverse double, reverse psychology thing, I do feel like that's probably pretty reliable if you look back on the sort of mid 2000s main event episodes.
Yeah, I mean, tells are, we watched Hollywood movies, we've seen all the movies about poker where it's, you know, Teddy KGB with his Oreos or the timing tell where, he takes 6 seconds to make a decision and he's folding or not. It's nice to, again, hear something that's a bit more grounded in reality in terms of tells. It doesn't distract from the main intellectual thrust of examining board texture, examining your opponent's experience, examining your chip stack. That's the real emphasis of the book, and tells are definitely secondary. Still important, but secondary.
Yeah, I'll show an example of one of the problems. This is you sort of see how he'll outline the table of letters, so you'll know where each player is in position, and the blinds and the chip counts and the blinds and the pot size are all shown. And again, there's a lot of that, so you might be constantly flipping back to the picture of the table to relate. Oh, which player was that again? Like player G. You don't know where exactly they were in the table, but that part aside. Again, there's probably I didn't count how many. There's probably like over like 100 and something problems, maybe almost like 150-ish. Because there's usually between like maybe like 6 to 9 in one section, but maybe one section or two had maybe like 15 to 20. So there's quite a few of those. And so it really, if you were trying to find a computer program to simulate every single poker situation, this book would get you a lot of those sort of situations.
Yeah, I mean, there were some chapters that had, I think, 20 different problems mentioned and hands mentioned. I didn't find it super repetitive or dry. Again, as I mentioned, each hand felt like a different scenario. I think he mentioned that these are actual hands that he's witnessed. He does talk about a couple of hands that he did during the '03 main event and what his sort of thinking was. But really, the emphasis is on those examples at the end and what he would do. There's not too much of, his sort of personal background in the game. Obviously, Dan Harrington won the '95 main event, made back-to-back final tables in the main event. He talks a little bit about that, but mostly it's on strategy and thinking through these examples of hands.
Yeah, and I found that even though the problems that he has in this book are kind of the defining feature of this book, I felt like even if they were totally expunged from the book, you still have a pretty comprehensive and solid book for poker strategies here. So I'm happy he was able to combine both of those together. And again, it was volume one of two volumes. And again, I think that even if you didn't even know it was volume one, you wouldn't have known that it was, half of a collection. So definitely a fun read. According to the cover, it says it was $30 when it came out originally. Again, I got it for considerably less. I want to say it was maybe like $9 on discount at a used bookshop. So if you see it on a shelf, check it out. You might enjoy it. And again, I definitely I gave it probably the gold medal for this 4 books here, with Jerry Yang coming in a pretty close second. I thought they were both very solid books. Whereas um, the Lindgren is funnier book, comparable. Maybe I give the nod to Lindgren just by a hair, but otherwise, I was still pretty happy with these 4 books that we read.
Yeah, I'm happy with these books too. I mean, Harrington on Hold'em, he doesn't necessarily say if it's intended for the amateur intermediate player. I think an amateur player would understand his concepts pretty well. And again, there's no, the World Poker Tour is the greatest poker tour of all time. There's none of that jokey sort of stuff in it. So I really appreciate the Harrington book a lot. And yeah, I agree with your rankings. Harrington would be number one. Again, Yang's book is a memoir. You can't quite compare them, but yeah, I give it number two. And then, Lindgren is Esfandiari toward the bottom. I still like reading them. Maybe I'd reread them again just to kind of get those, crazy Phil Locke stories about how he and Esfandiari spent $3,000 in Vegas. Some little fun, juicy insights in there. But yeah, like Harrington definitely is the gold standard of poker books that I think we've read thus far in terms of strategy, in terms of being accessible to the audience, and still having concepts that, 20 years after it was written, I think all of those concepts still apply today. You would add a chapter again on solvers and GTO, but I mean, examining board texture, thinking through your position, thinking through your chip set, those are all concepts that I think are still very much applicable today.
And I would absolutely read a modern written book by Lindgren or Esfandiari, almost 20 years later from their original publications. If they made looking back since 2003, 4, 5, whatever, I'd totally read that too. I know Esfandiari, he married Bob Bernard's daughter, who was Bob Bernard was a final tableist in 2011. And so again, it would be cool to kind of hear more about that. I know we mentioned it a little bit in past interviews, but I'd totally read more about him. And as far as Esfandiari did actually play in the Hustler Live casino poker stream. I think it was last week, and he made like $200,000 from that. So he's still playing poker, just not in the main event really so much anymore, which is a shame because he was really a regular deep runner in the late 2010s and like 17, 18, 19. So hopefully maybe he'll come back one year or come to the booth. But moving on to our other talking points here, the website avclub.com actually had a article last week or maybe 2 weeks ago talking about the TV show Tilt that we reviewed, a couple years ago, and that really hasn't had much coverage. I mean, it kind of came out in a weird time before like YouTube was as big as it was, and Wikipedia looking up old shows was not as common. So it was kind of funny. I posted in the comments section a link to our reviews, and we got what, maybe like 5 or 6 views from that comment posting on that article, and they were a little bit more positive on Tilt than we were, but they still conceded that it was a bad show. And they pointed out, the plotting was kind of strange, subplots didn't make much sense, the acting was kind of eh. But I felt like from the vibe of the article that they thought it was like a 2 out of 5 TV show, whereas we were in the firm 1 out of 5 TV show range. So not super far off, and they're kind of like, oh well, it set the stage for other gritty drama shows on TV, but really, it's just a bad show. But I was happy they at least gave some attention to it.
Yeah, so this is part of a series called One Season Wonders, Weirdos, and Wannabes, which is sort of about one season television shows. Um, yeah, as you mentioned, it seemed to be sort of more like a 2 out of 5 rather than anything else. Their conclusion for Tilt was it's a wannabe with moments of wonder. I don't agree with that at all. I mean, just I'm looking at the review right now, and in the second paragraph, the opening sentence is Madsen is terrific in Tilt. No, he's not. He's okay for the most part. I mean, Madsen was a talented enough actor and had enough screen presence. He can kind of just elbow and shoulder his way through the script. When he's at the table going, you look like you want to bet this card, so I'm just gonna let you. Like he's okay, he's fine. It's is more emotional stuff, like when he's like talking to his daughter or when he's trying to be like
Daughter.
really intimidating that I just didn't believe him. Yeah, like the scenes with his daughter. I remember watching. I can't remember which episode it is, but there's some scene where he's talking to his daughter and he like throws a glass on the ground. Like I couldn't tell if he was supposed to be drunk or not. I couldn't tell if he was supposed to be angry at her or not. The fight the fog scene where he's in the apartment showing the kid Eddie like the apartment and he's like, you gotta fight the fog. I had this player and he bluffed me and he said I got the matador. Like I couldn't tell, like, is he angry? Is he supposed to be like trying to encourage Eddie? Like what's going on here? Um So no, I don't agree with that at all. Yeah, I mean, it's just a kind of strange review because it doesn't mention a lot of things that I thought was really wrong with the show. There's very little attention paid to Officer Sadsack, who again, yeah, I mean, Madsen's performance wasn't great, but Officer Sadsack's performance is one of the worst in any television show I've ever seen, and just how strange his character was. Um, I mean, they mentioned that it brought a more sophisticated understanding at what being good at poker is, which doesn't make any sense at all. They even say the Matador's cheating racket is depicted realistically. No, it's not. Not when during the main event you can see the chips being handed to Madsen in front of everybody, in front of the cameras. No, it doesn't make any sense. They do mention how bad the production design was, that a lot of it was shot on nondescript Toronto hotel sets. They don't really mention the really weird subplots involving the guy getting a job during the main event
There was
and
one
he has
paragraph.
that like has to launder.
There was one
What's
paragraph
that?
where they mentioned it at one point in the article, like how the subplot with what's his face, the black guy, didn't really go anywhere. They kind of allude to it a little bit, but not specifically.
Yeah, I'm looking here. It says they introduce a clever twist with Clark, but there's not enough screen time available to show that story properly. But they don't talk
Yeah, it's
about,
kind of vague.
that
It's
he was
very vague.
laundering money and getting phone calls and things. Yeah, whatever. I'm willing to let that slide. They do mention the gay character being treated as a punchline, which I like. They also mention how, it's kind of racist and sexist. But yeah, I mean, I think Tilt got off too easy in this review now that I'm reading over it again. I mean, it was just terribly written. The dialogue is just super flowery and over the top. Um, Everything just looks terrible because again, they did that thing where they changed the color saturation that at the table it's more colorful, but away from the table it's more blurred out and less saturated. And that to me just makes it look really, really bad. The color and lighting corrections look really off. I mean, those scenes where Lowball is talking to that guy in the pool, and like the lighting from the pool is being thrown up against the wall. So it's just this like blue light on all these walls. That looks really, really bad. Um, yeah, no, I don't like Tilt. I mean, it is so bad it's good. I'm glad I saw it. But it is not by no means a wannabe with moments of wonder. It's a wannabe with moments of unintentional hilarity, cringe, racism, sexism. And Michael Madsen, obviously was great in Quentin Tarantino movies. I'm sorry that he's passed away. There's obviously that element attached to this review. They're looking back after he's passed away. But yeah, you don't have to bail Tilt out. Okay, don't bail Tilt out. Just let it be this curiosity. And if somebody wants to make like a video essay making fun of it, go right ahead. I'll watch it.
Yeah, or even cite us in the review because we were really the only ones on YouTube to have ever reviewed it really. So I think we're
Yeah.
unique in that respect. And again, with that review, uh, I mean it's like half review, half retrospective. It's not really like AVclub is known for its reviews. There's no letter grade on the article or anything. It's just sort of referencing the show from 20 years ago about and. The other big exciting news we have for our podcast is that next week on Monday, September 15th, we are being interviewed by Rec.poker. Jim Reed, who we interviewed in episode number 100 for us, invited us to join them for a 1 hour episode. I'm not sure what number episode for the Rec.poker podcast it'll be. They've done a lot more episodes than we have, though. And it's going to be fun to kind of finally flip the script on us and be us to be asked questions. I mean, I don't know what kind of question will be asked, but we kind of, we discussed with Jim. We had some back and forth during his interview about who we are, but I'll be very curious to be interviewed for really the first time for YouTube that I've been interviewed by somebody else.
Yeah, I mean, I've been interviewed for documentaries and news articles for some other things. But yeah, this is my first sort of podcast being interviewed. So yeah, it'll be fun. And obviously make sure to check out their YouTube channel. They've actually interviewed Jerry Yang among other people on their YouTube channel. So feel free to check out Rec Poker. And they also do pretty much daily tournaments, play money tournaments with the, crew. And I think there's like a contest where, if you qualify, you get enough points in the tournaments, you finish well enough over the course of a year, you get pins and things. So they seem like really cool guys, and the rec poker community seems like a lot of fun. So excited for it.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if it's meant to be a secret or not, but we'll be actually playing poker during the recording of this podcast. So Jim explained to us that it'll be sort of a new thing they're going to try out for that episode, where we're going to be playing concurrently. And I did play poker while we were interviewing Greg Raymer, so I do have the smallest experience of multitasking to that degree. And hopefully, by virtue of it being two of us being interviewed, we won't have to be like, we'll be alternating questions or answers, so that'll probably facilitate that being more doable. So that'll be unique, and hopefully we don't embarrass ourselves playing with the rec poker players who are probably, light years better than us. But as long as we don't go out last or second to last, I'll be okay with that.
Yeah, I mean, I am going to be paying more attention to talking with them than I am going to be playing poker. I'm just going to say that much. I'll try my best, but obviously as a tight player, I'm going to be folding a lot of hands, so that'll help me pay attention to what they're saying and try to answer their questions as best I can.
Yeah, and again, I'm sure I'll be very curious to see what the comments for them will be back, and will be it's just kind of fun though for all the interviews that we've done over the years. It's just kind of fun to finally have the reverse polarity and the neutron flow happen to us, and we'll be be kind of fun. And again, as long as we don't burst ourselves, then I'll be content with the experience.
Yeah, and if you would like to interview us on your poker podcast, feel free to leave a comment and we'll hop on the show. We're always looking for suggestions too. We reviewed books today. We're happy to look at some other books. Again, memoirs are on the table, strategy books are on the table, stuff that is more recent is on the table, as well as movies and TV shows. We do have a couple of more episodes in the pipeline with all previous guests as well as just with the two of us. So if you have, again, any suggestions whatsoever, feel free to leave them in the comments. And we are trying to follow developments in the poker world. I mean, obviously, there's not a whole lot going on in September, but we'll try to keep our eye on what PokerGo is doing and things like that.
I do think that the World Series of Poker online events are starting up pretty soon. I think Negreanu mentioned a while ago he'll be playing in those, and so maybe some top pro winner bracelet. That'll be kind of fun to see who can add to their total here. I know Helmuth still along the top of the leaderboard here. And it's more fun when there's like a two-man run for like the top records. So it'll be fun to see if anyone can even get within striking distance. I'd say if someone is within 3 or 4 bracelets, that will really kind of put the heat on Helmuth, and so that'll be fun to watch as the years go on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's possible that could happen. I mean, Miss Rocky could possibly have a good summer and start to catch up with him. I mean, we'll see.
Yeah, exactly. And so guys, until next time, enjoy your poker, enjoy your TV, enjoy your poker books, and enjoy everything at home with you in the poker world. Take care, guys.
Yeah, and I hope to see you in the money.
Bye, guys.